Frank Donovan woke at 6 a.m. sharp, as he had every weekday for the past 30 years. Without opening his eyes, he reached his right. The space beside him was empty, but the scent of freshly brewed coffee and a faint, floral perfume, jasmine noir, told him his wife, Eleanor, was already up. Frank smiled. In all their years, she had never once let him leave for work without breakfast. He walked down the polished oak stairs of their two-story Victorian in Oak Ridge Heights, the prettiest home on Maple Street. The town was small, a quiet, idyllic suburb of just 4,000 residents, but the Donovans were considered the local elite. He was the respected county sheriff, she the owner of the town's premier antique gallery and the tireless organizer of its biggest charity events. "Morning, sweetheart," Frank said. Eleanor stood at the stove, effortlessly elegant even in her silk robe. At 57, she looked a decade younger, slim, perfectly groomed blonde hair in a casual bun, and a posture that commanded a room. "Good morning, my dear," she replied, kissing his cheek. "Up at the crack of dawn again. I wanted to finalize the seating chart for the library gala tonight. You remember, don't you? It's the juvenile literacy fundraiser." Frank nodded, though without her, his schedule would be chaos. Unlike the ever-organized Eleanor, he'd grown a little absent-minded over the years. That hadn't stopped him from being the best sheriff Oak Ridge had ever seen. Breakfast was flawless. Eggs scrambled with chives, artisan toast, and coffee with the exact strength he preferred. They ate on the veranda overlooking the garden, every flower bed a testament to Eleanor's impeccable taste. "Dave was badgering me again yesterday," Frank grinned, referring to his deputy. Said his wife, "Martha has tried everything, and you're still light years ahead of her." Eleanor offered a tense, slight smile. "Tell him the secret is a happy marriage. When you wake up next to a man who looks at you like you're the eighth wonder of the world, you don't need expensive creams." They had met 32 years ago in Boston. Frank, then a young officer, noticed her at a society ball. Not a flashy beauty, but possessing a special grace and guarded confidence. A year after they married, they moved to Oak Ridge. Eleanor left a prestigious interior design job to support his career, quickly turning their quiet home into the town's cultural center. "Will you be late tonight?" she asked, stacking the dishes. "I'll try to be back by 6 for the gala," Frank answered, donning his uniform hat. "Unless a dog runs loose or the Peterson kids vandalize the community pool again." In Oak Ridge, drama was a rare commodity. Frank drove down Main Street, waving to the familiar faces. Everyone knew everyone, and the Donovans were universally respected. "Morning, Sheriff." Deputy Miller, his friend for 25 years, greeted him at the station. "Coffee?" "No, thanks, just finished." It was a typical quiet day. After reports, patrol checks, and a brief meeting, Frank stopped by City Hall. He got home earlier than usual, around 5 p.m., hoping to surprise Eleanor. Her car wasn't in the driveway. Strange. Frank opened the front door. "Eleanor." The house was silent. A small, elegant note lay on the kitchen counter. Had to make an emergency run to Boston for some rare silk ribbon for the centerpieces. Back by 6:30. Dinner is in the oven. Kisses. Boston was a 2-hour drive. Emergency? She hadn't called. Frank checked his phone. Her number went straight to voicemail. He frowned but headed upstairs to change. The cracks appear. That evening at the gala, Eleanor shone as usual, the undisputed hostess. But for the past 2 weeks, Frank had noticed a subtle shift. Nervous mannerisms, a lost look and quiet, late-night phone calls that ended abruptly when he entered the room. Her sudden, unannounced trip to Boston only amplified his vague anxiety. Frank buddy, Jack Morrison, their neighbor and a local physician, clapped him on the shoulder. "Your Eleanor has outdone herself again. That floral arrangement is spectacular." Frank nodded, watching his wife work the room. Bill Carpenter, the restaurant owner, approached. "Your wife's a marvel, Sheriff. She's only gotten more beautiful in 30 years. The evening was a massive success, raising a record amount. But Frank couldn't shake the unease. "How was the trip to Boston?" he asked casually as they prepared for bed. Eleanor froze for a brief, almost imperceptible second. "It was fine. The supplier nearly let me down, but I got everything." You could have called. I would have gone. It was too spontaneous, she said quickly, sliding into bed and turning her back to the wall. I am exhausted. Let's sleep. For the next few days, Frank watched. She seemed normal, but he knew her too well. Something was definitely wrong. On Friday, Frank came home early. As he walked past the kitchen, the phone rang. Eleanor was in the shower. Mechanically, he picked up the handset. Donovan residence. Eleanor, it's me. I have the blood work results. We need to talk. A man's voice. I'm sorry, this is her husband. Eleanor can't come to the phone. A heavy silence. I'm sorry. Wrong number. The line clicked dead. When Eleanor came downstairs, Frank told her about the strange call. She turned pale, but recovered instantly. Must be the antique dealer debt collectors again. They call everyone on a client's list. But he asked for you by name. Maybe it's about my last order, she shrugged, changing the subject. Jack invited us to a barbecue tomorrow. Frank agreed, deciding to hold off. Maybe he was inventing a crisis. At the Morrisons' barbecue on Saturday, Jack, a former military surgeon, grilled steaks. Frank couldn't relax. He noticed Eleanor flinch when her phone vibrated. She apologized and stepped into the garden. When she returned, 5 minutes later, she looked unnaturally pale. Everything all right? Just a client, a design project. I'll have to go to Boston next week. Frank nodded, but noticed Jack casting Eleanor an odd, assessing look, the physician's habit of spotting distress. That night, Frank went upstairs. Eleanor was asleep or pretending to be. Her phone was on the nightstand. His intuition, a tool that had never failed him in 25 years on the force, won the battle against his principles. He gently picked up the phone. The screen was locked, but a new notification hung on the display. From Robert. Results confirmed. Time is critical. We need to. Robert. Her brother. The one she supposedly hadn't spoken to in years. The revelation. In the morning, Eleanor was gone, leaving a note. Urgently called to Boston. Back tonight. Don't worry. Love. The flawless life they had built was suddenly covered in cracks. Eleanor returned late that afternoon. She looked exhausted. Is everything okay? Frank asked, turning off the TV. She sat next to him on the sofa, taking a deep, shuddering breath. We need to talk. I have to go to the hospital, she said, looking down at her hands. In Boston. Frank's heart dropped. What's wrong? Kidney issues, she whispered, looking up. Nothing fatal, just some necessary procedures. Why didn't you say anything? When did this start? I had the checkup 2 weeks ago when I went for the ribbons. They gave me the results today. I'll go with you. I'll take leave. No, she said too quickly. That won't be necessary. It's a simple procedure, only a few days. Besides, you have that important meeting with the district attorney on Wednesday. To hell with the meeting. This is about your health. Please, Frank. I'll feel better if you stay here and mind the town. I'll call you. He reluctantly gave in, but something was deeply wrong. Why the absolute refusal of his support? When do you leave? Wednesday. I've arranged everything with Dr. Fisher, an old family friend. On Wednesday morning, Frank walked Eleanor to her car. Call me directly from the hospital, he insisted. Tell me the name of the clinic and the room number. Just in case. Okay, she sighed. Frank, I love you. Don't worry. As soon as her car was out of sight, Frank went inside. He pulled out his laptop and typed 2 things into the search bar. Eleanor Donovan Boston Hospital and Robert Clark Kidney Transplant. He needed to know the clinic's name. The phone rang. I made it, Eleanor's strained voice said. I'm checking in now. What's the name of the clinic? Frank's voice was tense. A slight pause. Boston General Medical Center. Nephrology Department. Room number? I don't know yet. They'll tell me after check-in. I have to go now. I love you. The call ended. Frank grabbed his coat and his service weapon. An hour and a half later, he was at the Boston General Information Desk. I'm looking for a patient. Eleanor Donovan, nephrology. I'm sorry, sir. No patient by that name. Frank's. Heart pounded. He went back to the desk. Could you check for a patient named Robert Clark? The woman tapped the keyboard. Yes. Robert Clark. Admitted this morning. Transplant unit, 5th floor. Frank felt a cold wave wash over him. Transplant. He was right. Eleanor was going to be the donor. But why the elaborate lie? He found room 512. Robert Clark, thin and pale, was sitting up in bed. He bore a vague, passing resemblance to Eleanor. Robert Clark, the man looked surprised. Yes, and you are? Frank Donovan, Eleanor's husband. She didn't tell me she was visiting you. Frank closed the door behind him. In fact, she claimed she was the patient. Robert looked deeply embarrassed. It's complicated. Try. You're getting a kidney for my wife, correct? Yes. Kidney failure. Without a transplant, I don't have long. And you suddenly reconnected after all these years. We never lost touch, Robert faltered. We just kept our distance. Why the deception? She knew you'd be against it. Donation is a serious risk. I wouldn't have stopped her from saving her brother, Frank countered. But I have a right to know what's happening to my wife. Robert stared at the ceiling. You're right. It's just, Eleanor has always been very independent, and she didn't want to worry you. Why her? Are there no other matches? There were other options, Robert said, looking at him with sudden determination. But her kidney is a perfect match, because we're identical twins. Frank frowned. Identical? I never would have guessed. You don't look alike at all. It happens, Robert shrugged. Genetics is a strange thing. The irreversible truth. Frank returned home, his anger a cold knot in his stomach. The surgery was a success, and a week later, Eleanor was back in Oak Ridge, slowly recovering. Frank sat on the veranda that evening. Jack Morrison walked up, beer in hand. Just checking on the town hero, he smiled. They talked quietly. Frank finally leaned forward. You know, all these years Eleanor claimed she was estranged from her brother. Turns out they've been in touch. People hide strange things, Jack shrugged. He claims they're identical twins, Frank said, shaking his head. Jack, taking a sip of beer, choked, sputtering. I'm sorry, what? Identical twins, Frank repeated, confused by his friend's reaction. Brother and sister. Jack set the beer down, his face instantly serious. Frank, that's impossible. Identical twins are always the same sex. It's a basic scientific fact. One fertilized egg split into two. They have identical DNA. Ask any first-year med student. Frank felt a devastating chill. Always the same sex. He spent the night researching. Jack was right. The lie was deeper. It wasn't about the kidney. It was about who Eleanor was. The next morning, Frank drove straight back to Boston. He found Robert in his room. We need to talk, Frank said. About you and Eleanor. Robert paled. Identical twins are always the same sex, Frank stated, his voice flat. So how can you and Eleanor be identical? Robert finally dropped his gaze. You're right. We can't be. Because we're not. Or rather, she wasn't always a woman. Frank felt the blood drain from his head. What do you mean? We were born boys, identical male twins. Edward and Robert Clark. Edward later became Eleanor. She went through therapy, surgeries, all before she met you. She wanted to start a new life, to be her true self. 30 years, Frank whispered, the words tasting like ash. 30 years of lies. She didn't lie, Robert said softly. She just didn't tell you about a past that hurt her. Eleanor has always been a woman inside, Frank. Just born in the wrong body. Frank stumbled out of the hospital, the world spinning. The woman he loved, the foundation of his life, was a man. He drove home in a blinding rage. He found Eleanor in the living room. When she saw the look on his face, she knew. I talked to Robert, Frank said, his voice cold and detached. He told me the truth. She closed her eyes. Frank, is it true? He interrupted, taking a step forward. Were you born a man? She nodded, slowly, meeting his gaze. Yes, but I've always been a woman inside, Frank. Always. 30 years you've been deceiving me. I didn't lie. She stood up, cautious because of the surgical recovery. I just didn't tell you about a past that didn't matter anymore. Didn't matter? Fury rang in his voice. My whole life has been built on lies. He reached for the holster on his belt. His fingers closed around the familiar grip of the gun, and he drew the weapon. When Eleanor saw it, she froze. Frank, she said, her voice strained but controlled. Put the gun down. Let's talk. How can I talk calmly? His hand trembled. Do you realize what you've done to me? I realize you're shocked, she said, taking a slow step forward, holding out a hand. That's normal. But Frank, we can get through this. Together. I don't know who you are, he choked out, tears of confusion and betrayal welling up. You're the same Frank, she pleaded. And I'm the same Eleanor. Nothing changes who we are now. The gun in his hand began to lower. He looked at her, at the face he had kissed 1,000 times, at the woman he loved. His anger was giving way to a devastating confusion. Perhaps, in time, they could talk. At that moment, a deafening explosion ripped through the air outside. Neighborhood kids setting off a large firecracker. Frank, a man trained by 2 decades of instant, high-stress reaction, flinched violently at the sound. His finger instinctively tightened. The shot cracked through the quiet house. Eleanor staggered, a red stain instantly blooming on her silk blouse. Her eyes, wide with surprise and a deep, agonizing pain, looked at him one last time before she collapsed. "No," Frank whispered, throwing the gun away. "No." He rushed to her side, pressing his hand against the wound, dialing 911 with shaking fingers. "I need an ambulance. My wife has been shot. Hurry." Eleanor squeezed his hand, her lips silently forming a single word, love. Then the light left her eyes. Frank sat there, holding her lifeless body, as the flashing lights and sirens arrived. He offered no resistance as they handcuffed him. At the station, Deputy Miller looked at his mentor with incomprehension. "Frank, what happened?" "Eleanor is dead." Frank's voice was a ghost of itself. "I killed her, but it was an accident. The firecracker. I lost myself, and you pointed a gun at her because—" Frank raised empty eyes. "She was a man, Dave. All this time. 30 years. Dave shook his head, unable to process the horror. "Accident or not," Frank said, dropping his head into his hands, "she's dead, and I'm here. And that's how it's going to be for the rest of my life." He was charged with murder. In his cell, Frank held the only picture he was allowed to keep, their wedding photo. Eleanor smiled, beautiful and utterly real. He had destroyed the one thing in his life that had never truly been a lie.